Amarius Mims sounding off at the NFL Combine. Former Georgia offensive tackle, obviously a very, very quickly former, right? Just played offensive tackle for Georgia a few months ago, getting ready for the NFL draft. You got Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassiter, all sorts of guys over there, and Amarius Mims giving his interviews with those big smiles on a really big person, right? And he thinks the game against Alabama would have went differently if Georgia was completely healthy against the Tide in that SEC championship. Look, what ifs are a big part of this, are a big part of this job, I guess, talking about, well, if this happens, then that's going to happen. If X does this, then Y does this. I don't love the what if game, and I think that we've played it a lot with this game already, but we'll play it one final time. Is Amarius Mims right? If Georgia is 100% healthy against Alabama, do they win that ball game, and is Georgia's fate for the end of the season different, and they don't have to worry about getting to the college football playoff because they're the number one seed? Look, it's easy to make that argument because Georgia entered that game. Is Lab McConkey going to play? Is Brock Bowers going to play? Is Amarius Mims going to play? How healthy really is Georgia? Well, they all end up playing, right? And they're obviously not at 100%. And I actually think that, I just don't think this is much of a hot take, but if those guys were just straight up not out there, would Georgia have been better off? That's obviously on the coaching staff, right? That's on Kirby Smart. That's on Ron Corson, Georgia's I forget his exact title, but their training staff leader, essentially. It's up to them to decide, and the players themselves. Now, the player is not necessarily, you'd think the player would be the best judge of it, and they probably aren't at the end of the day, because what do they want to do? They want to be on the field no matter what. But the thing with those guys was, if they're out there and they're clearly not 100%, does that help Georgia or hurt Georgia more? That's kind of been the argument and the what if that I've wanted to lean towards when discussing this question. Look, man, I think Alabama executed better than Georgia did. I think that you can make arguments about the officiating. I do think the officiating was not perfect either way. It's never perfect either way. Obviously, I think there were more bad calls in Alabama's favor than Georgia's, but it's unfair of me to sit here and say that they didn't also favor Georgia here and there. You think about Jalen Milroe's big gain on a third or fourth down where he wasn't down, right? So there were moments for that. This game came down to a few things, and the health was an element of it. But Amarius, it's not the only thing that happened. Georgia just straight up lost that game against Alabama, and I kind of hope in a way this is one of the last times that I discuss it. But before I finish out this conversation, Ryan Curley from Dawg Post here talking about the SEC Championship one final time. What Amarius Mims had to say. Make sure you're looking at our newsletter. I'm linking that in the description down below. Every day in your inbox, free, premium. Look, we've got position previews. We've got what we're hearing, right? You don't want to miss out on those insider stories. So if you're putting that email address down in the link below, it's really simple. You want to be alerted of when things are going on. So make sure you're checking that out. Look, elite Georgia fans are signed up for the Dawg Post newsletter. Mims gets hurt kind of at the beginning of the Alabama game, right? I'm going to go with arguments for and against what Mims has to say. I'm going to go with one where it's for. He obviously was Georgia's best tackle out there on the right side. And you want your best guys. There's a reason why he was the starter at the beginning of the season. And also his frame. When you're playing against an Alabama who is extremely big, extremely physical, extremely empowering in the trenches. Look, I was at the game. Sometimes you can't exactly tell how physically imposing people are until you can see them in person. And before the game, before I headed off the field, you get to watch warm-ups. And when the Alabama trench team, right, that's what I'm calling them, but when you see their front seven on defense, when you see that offensive line, you see the physicality at a school like that. Now, you also see that at Georgia, don't get me wrong, but you want to match that. And how do you match that? You match that with having human beings like Amarius Mims out there on the field who are 6'7", 335, 340 pounds that are just strong as an ox and can run almost 20 miles per hour. That's what you want on the field. So yes, Amarius Mims, obviously I think that if you were out there and if Brock Bowers was out there in a healthy manner and if Lab McConkey was out there in a healthy manner, that Georgia would have been better suited to win. Now we go to the counter there. Amarius, you weren't out there a lot the entire year, right? Because you tweak your ankle, and that's not your fault that you get hurt against South Carolina. You have to have tightrope surgery, and you end up missing a few games. The thing about Amarius Mims is he barely played for Georgia at the end of the day. Freshman year, sits on the bench. That's whatever. That's not his fault. There was a lot of NFL linemen for Georgia. Sophomore year, he cracks the rotation. He's not a starter. He rotates a little bit at the tackle position. They end up wanting to put him on the right side, and that's where Warren McClendon was at. He's now in the NFL. Well, his first couple starts come in the wake of a Warren McClendon injury at the end of last season. Well, okay. Now it kind of looks like you're a one-and-done starter. Right? Just because of the physicality, you're projected to be a first-round pick. What happens? Well, he gets that starting nod as a junior this past season, and then he gets hurt in the third week of the season, ends up missing a bunch of games, and you look back, and at 3 years in his career, Amarius Mims only ends up playing or starting 8 games for the Dawg. So the counter argument there is Georgia didn't really have you out there that much in the first place, and they dominated some physical teams and dominated some really good teams without you out there. And that's not a knock on Amarius Mims. I'm not sitting here roasting Amarius Mims, but they played well without him out on the field, and that's not his fault. It's just the nature of what happened. I think that the other points of this game, I'm glancing at the box score to help me remember the moments in the game. If you look at this thing, and if you pull it up, I'll let you take a peek at what I'm looking at for just a second. I'm looking at the real simple box score on ESPN. I mean, just glance at Jalen Milroe's stats for a second. That wasn't an efficient game from Jalen Milroe. Yes, no turnovers, no interceptions is a big deal, but 13 for 23 for less than 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, nothing spectacular. 13 for 23, definitely not spectacular. It was in key moments. In key moments, Alabama did exactly what it needed to do. Things lined up the way they needed to. What happened on 3rd and long? Jalen Milroe had enough time to throw, ran around, made things happen. All of a sudden, Isaiah Bond's wide open. You saw things like that happen once, twice, not once, not twice. It happens a few times. And it feels like in these big games, that's what happens against Georgia. And that's just playing really good football teams and playing really good football players. I think Georgia's lack of finishing on Jalen Milroe, lack of the pass rush getting there, not just putting pressure, but actually getting there and making things happen, whether it be in the form of a QB hit, a QB hurry, or a sack. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sack. Those things didn't happen as much. On offense, Georgia just didn't look that clean, right? Things were kind of sloppy. You get that turnover that really hurts you on that miscue between Dylan Bell and Carson Beck inside the red zone, whether that's Mike Boble's fault or not. Running the ball, yes, Amarius Mims being out there would have helped Georgia run the ball better against a physical Alabama. But Georgia didn't struggle to run the ball like that all year long, and they only get 2.5 yards per carry against the Tide. It was a lack of execution, I think. It was, kind of at the end of the day, Nick Saban beating out Kirby Smart a little bit there. It's a really strange, looking at the stats of this game is really, really strange. And it just came down to the fact that these were two really physical football teams, and Alabama did win out. Is Amarius Mims right, though? If those guys are healthy, do they win the game? Well, without them being healthy, they only lost by 3. Now, Alabama, if time was a little bit longer, here's the part that the Georgia fans really don't want to hear, and it's about the end of that game, and this is not a positive thing about Georgia, and that's why people don't want to hear it, but it's the truth. Make the game a little bit longer, and it doesn't matter. Alabama probably still wins it because they went down and they secured the win at the end of the game. On that final drive, Georgia didn't stop Alabama. They went on and they ran the clock out. So it wasn't about running out of time. Georgia lost the game there at the end. The comeback fell short. The health, I do think, I point to coaching and execution. Right, just to sum up basically what I've been saying, I point to coaching and execution as the reason for the struggles in that game, more so than the health. Yes, the health is woven in there as kind of a secondary reason between those things. But Georgia continues to lose to Bama. Can't do this in the future, right? Nick Saban's not around anymore. And now we'll know more and more, I think, if this is really on Kirby Smart or if Alabama just brings its best against the Dogs. Thanks for watching. Newsletter down below.